One of the most ambitious Commander products that was ever created was perhaps the very first one, the set in Commander 2011. And the most ambitious out of those decks, without a doubt to me, is Political Puppets. It is so unlike the other four, where with those there is more of an obvious emphasis on building up a creature presence and then turning your creatures sideways. With the Political Puppets, you have more abstract Commander options, you have more abstract themes, but it really helped to highlight one of the most important aspects of the Commander format as a whole, and that is the politics of it. This is a multiplayer format. It is not as obvious and straightforward as you are my enemy so I must hate you. There are temporary alliances, there is such a thing as threat assessment. Just because Timmy is at 4 life doesn't mean you have to be the one to sink the knife in. With Political Puppets, you were given a face commander in Zedru, and 2 backup options in Ruhana the Fomori and Numat the Devastator. I'm going to get most of my complaints out of the way earlier on, my first one directed towards the fact that there's really no synergy between these options. Ruhan isn't really even a political card in a deck called Political Puppets. In fact, I would say that attacking randomly is pretty apolitical. Numat is a dragon commander option that gives you land destruction on a combat damage trigger, which is kind of political, but it's really going to draw you more hate than anything. The goal of politics in Commander is to leverage power against a single enemy. There is going to be someone who pulls out way ahead. It is your goal to get everyone else to fight them, taking all of the eyes away from your board and what you're secretly doing behind the scenes. And for that, the clear and obvious commander option to go with would be Zedru. At the beginning of your upkeep, you have a great card draw trigger that could also gain you some life, keep you in the game longer, and in order to fuel that trigger, you have an activated ability for 3 mana. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. Way more interesting than Ruhan and Numat, as it's way more complicated than simply attacking randomly, and it offers you way more upside than potentially hating on your opponent's lands. We were given cards like Goblin Cadets, Vidalcan Plotter, that made it very easy to give an opponent a permanent that you own. And if you didn't have enough creatures that would swap on their own, you were given plenty of options of permanents to give to your opponents that really wouldn't hurt you, like Fog Bank or Howling Mine. Second complaint is that there were plenty of permanents to include in this deck to synergize with Zedru, and you got the feeling that Wizards of the Coast didn't take advantage of that. So you're left with generic good stuff without really a focus on taking advantage of your face commander. Another complaint, it included the lowest total number of lands at only 34. The other 4 decks in Commander 2011 got closer to 40, and this is usually forgivable if you have plenty of ramp to back it up. But at Red, White, and Blue, we only really have the artifact ramp, and about only 5 of these you could consider ramp that would actually give you more mana on your following turns. On average, the mana costs for the cards are pretty reasonable, but why I think this is a problem is because Zedru's ability is more of a mana sink. You would want to activate this as many times as you could to get the payoff at the beginning of your upkeep. You want to draw more cards in any Commander game, and that is one of the goals with Zedru. Something that is unique to Political Puppets is that it is the only pre-constructed Commander product that you cannot legally play out of the box. That is because it reprinted trade secrets from Onslaught. This is perhaps the most political card in the entire deck. You are very clearly going to team up with another player to try and force out the other 2. That's what I love about Commander, but it is also something that can get out of hand pretty quickly. It didn't take long for this card to get banned for that kind of reason. Giving 2 players the option to basically team up, draw out most of their decks, get to their win cons for only 3 mana was ridiculous. But I can't really complain about that because it was more of after the fact, realizing how powerful that was. If anything, I do like how it was more political in its design. The only other card that I would say is super political is Death by Dragons, giving each other player than target player a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. You were singling out a player. You were basically telling the rest of the board, here is the clear and obvious threat, let's all go after them together. I feel like there was this misunderstanding for what politics was. With this deck you get a lot of pillow fort, you even get things like Howling Mine, but Group Hug isn't really political. Those strategies could turn political when you decide you want to win, but for the most part, abilities there are symmetrical. Politics is not symmetrical. It is all about shifting the weight of the game in your favor. This is really one of the aspects where I feel like Political Puppets failed. You get a lot of generic, good stuff cards, and not enough emphasis on, here is how we form a temporary alliance and then defeat the ultimate threat at the table. It's funny because in later Commander products like in Commander 2014, we would get really political cards, the offerings, There you would almost in trade secrets fashion side with a single opponent if you wanted to, in order to again shift the weight of the board. Here with this Precon deck we don't get much of that, which is why it is maybe one of the worst out of the deck experiences Commander products have ever had. So now we talk about the upside, and I think the most clear and obvious upside is the value that was included in a Precon deck such as this. You could say the same for all of the other ones in 2011. You get some really solid staples. Lightning Greaves, Howling Mind, Chaos Warp. They've been reprinted a bunch, so they've all gone down quite a bit, but it's still what's going to help carry the value for the deck now. With cards like Propaganda, Ghostly Prison, those two were included in so many Pillow Fort strategies, so many control decks that didn't have the creatures to defend. Champion's Helm was a unique card for this, just like with Chaos Warp, it was never printed before, and it remains as the most expensive card from this original Precon, getting you around $20 to $25. Another card unique to this deck is Flusterstorm. It is a card that still sees play today competitively. For a long time, this was the only printing of the card, which again helped the value overall for this deck. If you couldn't beat out the decks like with Kalia or Animar or Carador Ghost Chieftain, you at least wanted to get something out of the deck, and I feel like you do get that with versatile removal options like Austere Command. Doesn't see as much play as it used to, but being the first reprint of the card in 2011, this was a go-to in white. You could hate on artifacts, enchantments, and then creatures depending on their mana costs. Getting to choose two of those modes is really incredible. And I return to what I said previously about the land count being so low compared to the other precons, when we have an awesome near win con in Insurrection. We just have to make it easier to get to that kind of mana. Another upside to this earlier Precon deck is that you ended up getting a much wider variety in the legendary creature options. I already talked about Ruhana the Fomori and Numot, those didn't interest me as much, but with Nin the Pain Artist and Brian Stoutarm, Brian of course has been around since Lorwyn, and you had a way to synergize with the steel effects that you would find in this Precon. But with Nin the Pain Artist, you had another way to draw more cards, or another way to offer your opponent's card draw in return for damaging their creatures. This was a clear weakness earlier in the days of Commander products. Wizards would create a very interesting card and then expect you to do all the rest. There are pros and cons to that approach. The obvious pro is that you get to be more creative. You get to decide what you do with the legendary creatures in the deck. The downside is that you paid a lot of money for a Precon deck, and it's not that good out of the box. I mean, all they really had to do was throw in something like a stuffy doll, kind of a wink wink, hey, this is what you're supposed to do with this. But I still believe that this is one of the most important decks ever made, because while I think it failed to do so many things right, the message was there. It gets an A for effort when it comes to highlighting the greatness of this format. It's not as simple as let's find the quickest way to win, it's about how do we get our players to think. And this is one of the very first products that even dared to do that. The most popular commanders like Kalia, Animar from this set, you know what you're supposed to do with those. Zedru is way more open-ended. Unfortunately, if you wanted to build a deep deck around Zedru and the politics theme, you would have to replace most of the deck. But that being said, it was still an important step for this product's development. This isn't modern, this isn't standard. It's eternal, but it isn't legacy. Here we're actually thinking outside of the box and having a fun time doing it. So I like making them, and I know a lot of you like watching these retrospective videos. If that's the case and you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. We are now past 43,000 subs. Thank you so much for watching, Commander Void. I will see you all next time.